My name is David Call. This is my sign name. I'm from California, and I'm from a hearing family. My parents are hearing, my oldest brother is hearing, and I have a middle brother who is deaf, so 2 deaf boys. Growing up, I went to a school at an oral program. I learned absolutely nothing and had problems with rebellion. After I was expelled from one school, my parents decided to find a school district where sign language was used. At first, the school refused to use sign language, but my parents fought for me and eventually forced them to use Signed Exact English, or C. My mom wasn't aware of the difference. From the age of 8 until 13, I learned C. At 13, my parents found the California School for the Deaf Fremont. No, it was CSD Riverside, about 30 miles away. At first, the district wouldn't allow me to transfer, but again, my parents fought for me. The school taught in ASL. It was a completely different world. Within 1 year, I picked up ASL, completed high school, and graduated 5 years later. I then went to Gallaudet and earned a bachelor's degree and went on to CSUN and got a master's in special education. After college, I began working at CSD Fremont and was there for 30 years. I taught social studies for 18 years, topics like history and government, and then transferred to teaching art. I taught art for 12 years and retired 2 years ago. I got into art at a very young age, around 4 or 5. It's very common for deaf children who can't communicate with their hearing parents to write or draw. My parents recognized I had talent, and that motivated me to continue doodling as I grew up. I was fascinated by 2 artists. The first was Bosch. He created The Tree Man. It's a very famous work. I was just enamored with his art. The second was Albrecht Dürer, a very famous German carved printmaker. I was fascinated with his work. And one artist I forgot was William Kurelik from Canada, originally from Russia. His work was surrealistic and dreamlike, again, fascinating, so I emulated their work. My junior year of high school, I had a wonderful art teacher, Mrs. Rasden. At first, students were together in a group, but when she saw my skills, she took me out of the group to work independently. I didn't understand why at the time. She gave me independent projects and taught me different media, like Linocut. She started me down that path. Soon, I graduated and my art died away. At Gallaudet, I would draw things like posters for advertisements for events, but that was it. At CSD, I taught social studies for 18 years, not art, but I would do various art-related projects, sketching and carving. I had that love of art deep inside. The art teacher at the school at the time was your typical old school teacher, painting, drawing, how to structure compositions, not very interesting at all. I had some different ideas, so when that person retired, I was very excited to apply. The administration told me no, because they didn't see any value in teaching art to deaf students, which made me angry, but the high school principal was hearing, but a good ally, who believed in me and said yes to a pilot test program. I taught 2 classes, and they were a huge success, teaching Devia art, deaf art. The students loved it and felt connected to the art. The result was a lot of success with art. The program grew, and I became a full-time art teacher for 12 years and then retired. After retirement, I would do side jobs with my art from home, but from 2005 to 2011, I taught art, and that was all. It was deaf art, but I was unaware of Devia. I found more and more deaf art classes and issues, and I steered toward Devia. From 2005 to 2011, people would contact me for my artwork. At first, I made art to show the process, but more and more people wanted to buy my art. So in 2011, I started doing my art at home. Sales increased and the business really took off ever since. I still make art, but it's a variety of Devia or deaf-themed art. My art process starts when an idea pops into my head. I may research online on the internet for famous artists that inspire me. I find various works that I like. One famous Linocut artist from New York is named Stephen Alcorn. I base my style on his style, his lines, how he carves. Another artist who inspires me is Käthe Kollwitz, a German artist during the Nazi period in history. She's a famous artist, and her work is fascinatingly beautiful. Their Linocut artwork is my inspiration, and I've emulated their styles over the years. I start with a rough sketch, and then I draw on the Linocut block. You can draw right on the block and make any changes or corrections right there. If I do any kind of words or text, I have to reverse the text and use a mirror to check that it is reversed correctly. Once the Linocut is carved and printed, you can't fix any mistakes, so I check it with a mirror to make sure it's right, and then carve the block. I look online for ideas and inspiration. That's how I do my work. Okay, I'm going to explain how I do my Linocut printmaking. First, I have a Linocut block. This is the cutter for carving. After the carving is finished, next is the ink. I spoon the ink on here and roll and transfer the ink onto the block with a brayer. I take the block and I put it on the template support. Then I lay the paper on top. Next, I take the 35-pound rolling pin and roll it out. That's how I do my printmaking. I will explain one of my works. This print is called Breakthrough. This piece of art is an homage to the 300th birthday of l'Abbé de la Paix. It will be 300 years in 2012. There is a lot of symbolism in the print. You may notice this scene is in the basement. In his writings, de la Paix described his perspective of the deaf experience as being in a dark isolation, like living in a deep basement. Here, he is breaking through that dark isolation. The bust on the left represents Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, who declared that people learn through hearing, so a deaf person could, of course, not learn or be taught anything. That idea influenced education for over 1,000 years, leaving deaf people in the dark for over a millennium. The butterflies represent two deaf French girls. People would come to church all the time. De la Paix noticed one family did not go to church, so he went to visit the family and asked the mother why they didn't go to church. The mother explained that her two daughters, in their 20s, were deaf, but could sign. The mother asked de la Paix how her daughters could go to heaven when they die. De la Paix began to learn their sign language, a native language of that region, and went on to establish a school for the deaf. That's why it's called Breakthrough. The butterflies represent the two deaf French girls, who are now free. The other bust represents a second challenge to deaf liberation. A German man named Heinecke was a strong oralist who often would argue and butt heads with de la Paix, as witnessed by their letters, because Heinecke believed the oral method was better than sign language. In French, l'Abbé de la Paix means the father of the sword, because the two of them would cross swords with each other. That struggle continues today, and it is now up to you, the viewer, to break through the second wall. Here you see 3 fleurs, or symbols of a lotus flower. These 3 flowers represent famous deaf people: Berthier, Laurent Clerc, and masu. And these are their hearing allies. L'Abbé de la Paix, Sicard, and Gallaudet. These flowers are an homage to those individuals. This piece is titled La Bella Luna, which means the beautiful moon. This is a deaf girl named Luna, and this is the moon. Once a month, when the moon is full, Luna appears and plays in the moonlight with her white hair. By chance, Luna met a hummingbird hawk moth, so named because it looks like a hummingbird when it flies to feed on the nectar of flowers. The moth told Luna it had something special to show her. So Luna chased the moth over hills and through trees until they arrived at a field full of beautiful white moonflowers. She was overwhelmed with the beauty of the dazzling white flowers. Luna joked that the moth must be very popular with the flowers because it kissed each one. Luna greeted the moon. The moth told Luna and the moon to follow it, and so Luna chased the moth to another secret place. That secret place only appears when the moon is full. So next time there's a full moon, see if you can find Luna chasing the moth, okay? Years ago, the Milan Conference took place in 1880. The Roman numerals here are 1880. That council decided that sign language would be illegal, effectively putting sign language to death by crucifixion. Here, the hand is crucified, symbolizing sign language was now illegal. This work is titled Andrew's Baobab Tree. This pays homage to an important man who established 31 schools for the deaf all over Africa. In the print, you see Andrew himself, a wise man traveling the continent. His sash is covered with adinkra, symbols from the Ghana region, where the first school for the deaf was established. There is prevalent use of the adinkra symbols in clothing and tile art. This symbol here represents knowledge. It was given as a gift, planted, and grew into a baobab tree. Historically, the baobab is one of the most cherished trees in all of Africa, and it can live for over 1,000 years. Once established, birds, representing deaf students, find safety and learning in the branches of the baobab tree. The numerous trees represent the many deaf schools being planted all over Africa. This symbol represents courage. The circle symbol represents charisma and Andrew's ability to draw people in. Remember, in Africa, there is no internet, no phone calls, and still Andrew managed to convince the government to start 31 deaf schools. This design is an African motif with 2 hands. The adinkra in the corners is the symbol of knowledge, the same symbol that we see planted. This is the mask of knowledge, representing the rising sun. The lines represent struggle and perseverance. The checked pattern represents knowledge, thus the mask of knowledge. It symbolizes the bright future of deaf education in Africa. This print is to honor Andrew Foster. Some of my art has a common theme, such as this piece from the Mother of All Deaf Souls collection. It represents an ethereal gift born to all deaf people everywhere. I will explain a little bit more. In these two pieces, this was when I first conceptualized the Mother of Deaf Souls, and this is a later painting. Here the woman travels the world giving birth to deaf children. One day, Mother realized the old world was finished and needed a new place in the new world. She climbed aboard a flying dinghy and traveled through the storms of autism until the clouds parted and blue sky was ahead. She found an island and started a new deaf community in the new world of America. That island was Martha's Vineyard. And here you see she signs PA, or success at last. The boat came to rest and she birthed the deaf community there. This is an early work from the Mother of All Deaf Souls collection. The woman is using sign language and it is spreading like waves from the island to the American mainland. The ships are carrying deaf community and culture from the island. This is another Martha's Vineyard piece called The Expectant Mother. You can see she's pregnant. This represents that sign language had been used and developed over 150 years on its own. The boat represents the arrival of Thomas Gallaudet and Laurent Clerc, where deaf culture is ready. The birdhouse represents a safe place for the deaf community to grow and flourish on the island of Martha's Vineyard. The comet was a sign that something good was about to happen. The birth of the deaf community in America. As soon as Clerc and Gallaudet arrived, ASL was born and spread throughout America. The rock represents the island of Martha's Vineyard. 1694 was the year the first deaf person named Jonathan Lambert moved to Martha's Vineyard. He was married to a hearing woman, Elizabeth. I can't remember her last name. What started with 10 deaf families grew over the years, and in 1817, the American School for the Deaf was founded. Oh, and this oval shape represents a woman's vagina for giving birth. This is titled, If Mona Lisa Was Deaf. If she were deaf, she would have been oppressed. This burlap sack on her head represents oppression. Button eyes, because we don't want to see her, she's blind. Her speech needs to be fixed, so it's sewn shut. The bells represent a cochlear implant. Really, it's a symbol of A.G. Bell and the sound of clanging bells. Notice the bells are cracked, representing a system that is broken. The clapper in the bell is actually a skull. Meaning a deaf person loses their soul after receiving a cochlear implant. The noose represents oppression again. The mechanical finger again represents A.G. Bell, who once said, "The deaf need to forget that they were deaf and never remember." In Nepal, this is the sign for deaf. There are 5 senses, and deaf can't hear, so this finger is put down. So a deaf person must have surgery and get a cochlear implant to fix what is broken. It's painful, but now they can be whole again. To be deaf is not allowed. In the background is a blue lake and a dam, causing the area to become stagnant and dry and putrid. This building represents the Volta Bureau, A.G. Bell Oralist headquarters in Washington, D.C. Here, the dragon represents A.G. Bell. It's from the story of Saint Germain and the dragon. The rider on the white horse is Vedets, come to challenge and slay the dragon, and save the deaf victims in the Volta building. Here you see the mother of all deaf souls. once hidden in a secret world separate from the oralist oppression. Now she is chased by the plague doctor who wants to fix her for her benefit. He doesn't care about her health, but he chases her and she escapes to tell the truth about what happens. This is the plague doctor's hat, which represents doctors wanting to fix deafness. This factory in the background represents the cochlear implant medical system, which is pervasive. It includes lobbyists, lawyers, implant manufacturers, and a huge system represented by the factory. The building is a dam, causing the lake behind it to die and become dry. We must tear down that system, and it will be a blue lake again. While there, the system is a huge barrier for deaf people. These two dams represent the same thing. This inscription, written in Latin, is taken from a tombstone. It says, "I once was what you now are, and what I am you shall yet be." It means, when you are buried, you will become bones like me. My interpretation of the inscription is one day all naturally deaf people will be captured and implanted, just like the deaf Mona Lisa. This painting is a warning. That is my interpretation of Mona Lisa as resistance art. My advice for artists is there's no such thing as a right or wrong way. The famous artist Pablo Picasso said, "Everyone is born an artist." The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. Don't give up. Keep making art. If you make a mistake, so what? I've made a lot of mistakes. Just keep going. Don't allow that to stop you. All art is good in the end. You'll be fine. You can do it.